going from the pursuit of perfection in all things to ultimate depravity isn't a journey anyone makes in one step. It's a series of small ones, each one justifiable in its own isolated way. But after you've taken 100 of those small steps, you're a long way from who you were at the start. Hey there, 40K fanatics. It's me, Casey, again, bringing you all that lore from the grim darkness of the far future that you love so much. So, today we're talking about the Primarch Fulgrim, one of my personal favorite Primarchs, if I'm being honest. Not just because of his fall, but just because of kind of who he was before he fell and became a traitor. So, if that's everything, let's get into it. Fulgrim, the Phoenician, Primarch of the Third Legion, a pretty boy, a vainglorious braggart. Fulgrim was a Primarch who, much like the others, scattered across the universe and would land on a world called Chemos. Chemos was a mining world that depended on other worlds to supply it with its necessities. Having been cut off for who knows how long, all the people there lived to work nonstop. The food was rationed strictly, and people worked pretty much all hours of the day and barely got any sleep, eking out a meager existence that they could barely sustain their lives. In that work, they had no time for things such as art, music, or fine dining, or fine cooking until Fulgrim showed up. Being found in his gestation capsule, much like all the other Primarchs, Fulgrim would come to maturity within a year. He would then go on to lead the people of Chemos and put them in a cultural renaissance, upgrading their machinery to be either automated fully or partially, giving them downtime to focus on things like the arts. He would instill in them the driving force of perfection in all things physical, emotional, artistic, you name it. Eventually, the Emperor of Mankind would get word of his son on this planet and go to find him. Meeting his son for the first time, he saw the world of Chemos in a grand, lush, beautiful world decorated with fine art, jewelry, shining gems of culture and beauty. The Emperor would take his son Fulgrim and bring him back to Terra to unite him with his legion of space marines. Being united with his legion, Fulgrim would give a rousing speech which would instill in the hearts of his sons a great personal pride. After which, the Emperor was so taken aback by his amazing speech that he called his legion the Emperor's children. After which, he even gave them the right to wear the imperial aquila upon their breast. But unfortunately, like a lot of Primarchs, there was a bit of a hiccup. See, before Primarchs like Fulgrim would come and see their legion, maybe there was something that they had to fix or re-strategize or restructure. Fulgrim's legion was unfortunate in that their gene seed stores prior to him getting there were poisoned or affected by a disease in which the space marines would grow big tumors, live for very short time, and then die. Their chief apothecary, a man named Fabius, would go on to try to cure this sickness, but to no avail. Eventually, Fulgrim would reinvigorate their genetic stores with his DNA, and then they would just make new space marines from that, kind of dooming the old space marines to eventually die from a culling. So, Fulgrim would take his legion and strive to instill in them the art of perfection and beauty, just like he had striven on Chemos itself. He would show them that not only were they to bring worlds of humans back into the imperial fold, spread the imperial truth, but to also raise them up and make them better so that they can fly high and reach the heights they were meant to reach. He kind of was really full on himself, if I'm being honest. Fulgrim was very vain, very vainglorious. He had an air of superiority, but he also acted very selfless. Many think that this was a front and that when he would go behind closed doors, he was very selfish and conniving, and he only put on this front to act that way for others. I'm more of the person who thinks part of that may be true, but how many of us don't have that little side of themselves that thinks, oh, I'm a little better than someone or something at times? And Fulgrim, I think, was just a little bit more affected. Being a Primarch, he was a personification of humanity. And I think that this part of humanity was brought out more in him. He would go on to meet his brother Ferrus Manus, father and Primarch to the Iron Hands Legion, whose name literally in Latin means iron hands, by the way. So he would go on to meet Ferris. They would challenge each other because they both were kind of very stalwart, very challengey, loved taking on a challenge. And they said that each other were the best blacksmith. They would spend 3 months in the forges on Terra making weapons to try to outshine the other. When they were done, Ferris would present his weapon and Fulgrim his. Fulgrim made a glorious warhammer called Forgebreaker that would be able, as it is said, to level whole mountains. And Ferris made an elegant sword wreathed in flame that could cut through just about anything, called Fireblade. They exchanged weapons and judged the other to be the winner. So, after that, brotherly bond was cemented and they loved each other way more than any other Primarchs did. In fact, Ferrus Manus was first in Fulgrim's heart, and Horus was actually second. Eventually, restoring his legion to a better counterpart, he would use his gene seed to replenish the numbers in his ranks. Unfortunately, because he started only with a few hundred, and other Primarchs started with thousands, maybe even tens of thousands, Fulgrim was at a severe disadvantage. So, him and his Space Marines had to strive for utter perfection in battle, becoming blade masters, accurate marksmen, even by Space Marine standards. They tried to strive for beauty and perfection in all that they did. So, one day, they went to a world called Lairin, Laron, whatever you want to say it. It was a world full of water, much like the old classic movie Waterworld, which is awesome, and populated by a serpentine group of Xenos species known as the Lairn. The Lairn would secretly worship the chaos god Slanesh. Unfortunately, the Emperor made it his personal mission not to let anyone know about the influences of the chaos gods at all, believing that science and the belief of technology would get humanity leaps and bounds ahead of everything and starve the chaos gods for good. So, Fulgrim fights his way onto the planet with his legion, going straight into the capital, bursting and fighting right into the main chapel in the big city. There, he would find a blade unlike any other that he was drawn to, that just called to him, called the Lairn Blade. Unfortunately, this blade would contain a greater demon of Slanesh, the chaos god of corruption, lust, stimulation, you name it. Basically, Slanesh is the god of sex, drugs, and rock and roll. The god of crank that knob to 10 and keep cranking it till it breaks. So, this greater demon would slowly and slowly corrupt the mind of Fulgrim, and as you would see during the Great Crusade, he started to hear these voices and think it was his own conscience telling him words. Because, I mean, I kind of think it's kind of dumb. I mean, if you hear words in the back of your head, you're obviously going to not think it's you. But I think that it may have been a situation where he had similar thoughts to what that voice was saying beforehand. So maybe he was a morally bankrupt and corrupt person behind closed doors, like many people think, and that the demon of Slanesh just kind of played on that. Eventually, he would meet up with his brother Ferris Manus once again. While Fulgrim was fighting an alien race known as the Diasporax, he found himself quickly outnumbered and had to call for help. Ferris Manus, loving his brother and quick to defend him, would show up with his vast fleet and help him annihilate the Diasporax fleet, while Fulgrim infiltrated the flagship and killed the leadership, while his own space marines just went to town on these guys, and not in a traditional space marine way. So, after the battle, Fulgrim would hear all these little jibes and jests from Ferris, and he'd be like, "Haha, brother, I had to save you again. I'm beginning to make a habit out of this," or something like that. And Fulgrim would stop because of the corruption of the demon in the blade. He wouldn't see this for what it was, a friendly brother jesting at him, making small jokes or inside jokes. He would hear it as his brother looking down on him, degrading him, talking to him like a dog, and it just filled his heart with hatred. Eventually, he would meet up with his brother Horus and not be known to Horus at first, would be fully corrupted by the greater demon in the blade. The greater demon would often take over his body completely, while Fulgrim would kind of trade off with him, not fully aware of it. Horus would plan the heresy and decide to go against their father, taking half the Primarchs with him in what would be known as the Horus Heresy. Thinking tactfully, they would plan something to be that would be known as the Istvan Dropsite Massacre, where all the traitors would lay a trap for the loyalist forces who would come to fight a few legions that they had thought traitor, when in fact they had doubled in number and would outflank the loyalists and utterly destroy them at Isfahan. Not only that, but they would purge all of the loyalist elements within their forces as well. So, before the Isfahan drop site massacre, Fulgrim would meet his brother Ferris one more time. On orders from his brother Horus, who had been named War Master as well, would tell Fulgrim to try to sway Ferris to his side. Going into Ferris's ship, him and his elite guard of Terminators would meet with Ferris and his elite guard of Terminators. In his private quarters, Fulgrim would talk to his brother and try to convince him to go over there to the traitor's side. Ferris, being a very man of action and strong of opinion, punched him in the face and then broke the fire blade with his iron hands, knocking him out. Fulgrim would fight his way out. Unfortunately, his entire escort would die, while Fulgrim killed a good portion of Ferris's Terminators on his way out. Then they would eventually meet once more on the fields of Istvan. When traitor forces fired on loyalist and loyalist forces within their own legion, Ferris and Fulgrim would lock blade to blade in combat. Fulgrim wielding the Laren blade and his brother wielding Forgebreaker. As they fought, the two clashed and would taunt and fight as all of the loyalist forces, hundreds of space marines, would die in minutes. Fulgrim would soon realize that he was faster than Fulgrim Fulgrim would realize that he was faster than Ferris, and Ferris would realize that he was stronger than Fulgrim. I swear the two Fs are really messing me up. So the two fought, and then Fulgrim would sort of get the upper hand. But in a moment of weakness, he just couldn't find himself to beat or kill his favorite brother and best friend. Ferris taunted him a little bit, and then in his moment of doubt and weakness, the greater demon took charge of Fulgrim's hands and sliced his beloved brother's head clean from his shoulders, killing the Primarch stone dead. After which, there was no going back, and Fulgrim, in his lament, gave in to the darkness in his heart. The demon, fully possessing Fulgrim from that moment on, would fight using Fulgrim's body during much of the Horus Heresy. Eventually, trying to lead his legion, many of his space marines realized there was something wrong with Fulgrim and were like, "Hey, something's wrong with Dad. He's not right." One of his sons, Lucius, would realize that there was a painting in his own quarters, and the eyes sort of followed him around. This painting made him realize it was Fulgrim in the painting and that their father had been possessed by a demon. So, taking it upon himself, Lucius gathered the other leadership of the Emperor's children and tried to purge the demon from his flesh by torturing him, beating him, flensing his flesh for who knows how long. Eventually, they thought they had failed and they couldn't do it. And then that's when they realized Fulgrim instantly healed from his wounds, got up from the table, and said, "That was great fun." Fully corrupted by Slanesh, Fulgrim had overthrown the demon in his body and banished it to a painting. It is at that point that the Emperor's children would fall darker in depravity and started to commit horrible atrocities within their own legion, augmenting their bodies, using cultists and slaves as either cannon fodder or drugs or even whatever they could think of, torture, all that stuff, crazy, awful stuff, and things that I can't even say because YouTube will probably demonetize me. Eventually, this would lead them to Terra. And getting ready for the battle, they realized that they needed to take a step forward. Fulgrim wanted to reach demonhood. So he met with his brother Perturabo, Primarch of the Iron Warriors Legion. They would go to a Eldar Crone world, or Eldar Maiden world, actually, where they would look for some kind of super weapon. On the cusp of finding this super weapon, Fulgrim turned on his brother and attempted to kill him to achieve apotheosis, but Perturabo, being Perturabo, just backhanded him. Had his Iron Warriors just shoot him in the back from a distance because Perturabo was smart, and Fulgrim failed. However, he didn't. Perturabo left, and Fulgrim still became a demon prince, turning into a giant half snake, multi armed monster. Wielding a poison blade gifted to him by Horus, he became a full blooded demon primarch of Slanesh. Eventually, the Siege of Terra would happen, where Horus would fight the Emperor. Sanguinius would die, and the traitor legions would battle across all of the Segmentum Solar and across the battlefields of the Imperial Palace. Except the Emperor's children. So, the problem with chaos is they are too chaotic, and the Emperor's children follow a chaos god of indulgence, party and rock and roll, like I said, and would literally not listen to any orders and slaughter and murder and torture the civilians on Terra or vaporize them and then use them for combat drugs in the really messed up fashion that they were. Eventually, Horus would wound the Emperor would kill Horus, Sanguinius would die, and the traitors had to fall back to the Eye of Terror. After many, many months, maybe a few years, Fulgrim would find his way to a planet called Thessaly, where he would fight his brother Rabute Gilliman aboard his flagship. Rabute Gilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, and his many chapters would infiltrate the flagship and try to take it down in as methodically and ultramarine way that they could by the book, and it was a trap. Fulgrim pounced on his brother Rabute, attacking him from any direction. Every time a blade would get knocked from his hand, another one would spawn until eventually, once he got the upper hand, Fulgrim would manifest the blade that he was gifted by Horus and wound his brother, almost slicing his throat. Being poisoned by a wound that never seemed to truly heal, the Ultramarines evacuated their Primarch while he was unconscious, as many lives were lost in the defense on the ship. Fulgrim did not win his prize. In the closing days of what was the Heresy and after that battle, Rabute Gilliman was taken to Macragge to heal in a stasis pod, whereas Fulgrim eventually would go back to the Eye of Terror and pretty much be absent from most of the 40k setting for a very long time. Some say that an event would happen where his pride, something that meant just about everything to Fulgrim, would be damaged during a large event involving one of his ancient sons. But we'll talk about that another time. As far as things have been, there have been whispers and words out in the warp and among the Imperium of a large serpent being preying on the civilians and people of the Imperium. Some say he's still active out there. Who knows? Maybe we'll see a new model because the old model is really crap. And I really want a Fulgur model because, man, would that be awesome. Anyways, that's been it. Fulgrim is not very present in the current 40k setting, but hopefully that will change in time and we'll get to see more of him. I'm looking forward to it. And who knows what 10th edition 40k will have for us. So, that's been me, Casey, straight from the Grimdark Garage. Have fun out there, you 40k fanatics. I'll see you out there in the future. Peace.